Welcome to Big Blend Radio, where we celebrate variety and how it adds spice to quality of life. Welcome, everyone. Today we're talking with Juliette Eisner, the director of the new docuseries by National Geographic called The Stanford Prison Experiment, Unlocking the Truth. It explores a new narrative examining the motives of Dr. Philip Zimbardo, the Stanford University psychology professor who oversaw the Stanford Prison Experiment. It was a prison simulation that took place over 2 weeks in 1971 and forever shifted the field of psychology and its interpretation of human nature. The series is out on November 13. It delves into the study and features first-hand accounts from the original so-called guards and so-called prisoners, many speaking on camera for the first time. Welcome, Juliette. So glad to have you here on Big Blend Radio. I have to tell you, we just watched the Stanford Prison Experiment, Unlocking the Truth, all 3 episodes of this riveting, and I mean riveting, docu-series that's out now on National Geographic, and you can get it also on Disney Plus on Hulu. But Juliette, we can't stop talking about it. You freaked us out. Not you, but this is you can't stop talking about it. This is a crazy story.
Well, I'm glad. That makes me so happy. That's all I want to hear is that it inspires people to have conversations and talk about the show and talk about the bigger themes at the center of it all. So I'm very happy.
Yeah. It's really crazy because let's get into the doctor himself, Dr. Philip Zimbardo, who has recently passed away too. So you probably got one of the last or the last interviews with him.
Yes, we haven't been able to confirm. We're not 100% certain, but we do think that we had maybe at least one of the last long interviews. We spent 2 days at his home in San Francisco in a couple of years ago in 2020, and interviewed him over the course of 6 hours. And it's very sad about his passing and just terrible timing. And wish that he could have seen the show. One of my big. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really complex story because when you think about this experiment, and it's also being at a university, it's like, the college students that went in to be the prisoners and the guards in the simulation of the experiment of being in prison went under this guise of, easy, quick money to make in the summer. And being in a university, you feel safe. Don't you think that they felt that because of the Stanford University part of it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the context in which this study took place is so important, and the ways that they were interacting with Zimbardo at the beginning of the study, especially for the guards who went through this multi-hour training session. I mean, I think that they all came into this feeling like, oh, this is above board. This is very legitimate. Has all the scientific integrity of Stanford University that you could imagine. And then, it may not have been all of those things necessarily, but absolutely, I think they came into it thinking they were going to get something else than what they did get.
Yeah, and for some of them, this became a traumatic thing throughout their life, and made them question themselves because no one looked great in this, especially if you were a guard. I think I would have to really question myself and do a lot of volunteer work afterwards.
Yeah, I think it did stick with a few of them. Chuck Burton, a guard participant in particular, he comes to mind. I mean, I think he described this once as, one of the 3 pivotal moments of his entire life. And I think it really shaped the way that he really led his life going forward. I think it was quite traumatic for him. And something he doesn't talk about very often is that his family was actually they were refugees in World War II. He lost many of his family members in the Holocaust, and he became a guard and started inflicting pain on other prisoners. And I think that was something that he really had to analyze and grapple with throughout his life.
And then here you had one that was, I'm the actor and I'm going to do my best job. Here's my performance, right? And being the John Wayne, that had to be crushing.
Yeah, but I think, the where it gets interesting, in my opinion, is when you
Mm,
start to talk to the John Wayne and you
hmm
start to talk to some of the other guards, who really, they acted a certain way because of a lot of different elements in this study that weren't necessarily made very clear.
mm.
As Zimbardo, spent many years kind of talking about its lessons. So I think what was so interesting and fun for us, exploring this subject, was to get to hear about these personal experiences that you really don't hear about, the backgrounds, what these kids were like when they were coming into this study, and also the ways that the experimenters and the
Mm.
researchers were, you know, pushing them in certain directions. And it still begs the question, what would you really do that if you were in that situation? And what is it okay to do those things? Probably not. But
Yeah.
it does give more detail and more context to an otherwise fairly simple kind of narrative that's Zimbardo.
It just reminds me of like when we were kids and we used to play like fairy tale games, right? And stories. We would enact stories, but there was always a parent going, "All right, that's enough. You're going to cross the line." And no one crossed the line. No one was there to stop the line being crossed or being pushed towards it. But the Zimbardo, that's what's freaky to me watching him on, shows like even Stephen Colbert. I'm like, what are you doing on there, man? What are you doing? So about how this like really catapulted his career in media. And then at the same time with Abu Ghraib, that to me, I interviewed two of the lawyers from that case actually like a decade way long ago, and how it compared to what was going on with the experiment. And that just freaked me out. Like that really went like, what was going on with that? How did that happen? You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I mean, I think Zimbardo was really brilliant at getting the word out about his study. And he would really latch on to events, moments in history that were kind of the same vein, or relevant to the lessons of the Stanford Prison Experiment. And some argue that it was wrong to kind of make that comparison to Abu Ghraib. I think that knowing what we know now about how flawed this
Yeah.
study was, I don't know if you can really call it a study. There wasn't really any scientific.
Manipulation.
um, it's probably not the best idea to be relating real life events to something that was, just a simulation and happened once, 50 years ago. So yeah, there's definitely, people definitely think that some of those things, some of those kind of the ways that he would relate the study to these current events were problematic. And again, just have to be careful when you're dealing with a so-called study, and trying to understand real
Mm.
life issues.
And he comes from a background too. Like he has his own story that applies to this in a way. And so but you don't hear that really that often in things. And it's like at the end, when you got his interview and his wife, I mean, thank goodness for his wife, right? Who was his girlfriend at the time. I think that was a godsend for the so-called prisoners and so-called guards, that she helped stop that. How did you find this story? Like, how did this, come to be for you?
Yeah, it was, I really started looking into this during the pandemic when I had a lot of time on my hands. And it was really, my interest in this kind of was sparked in the summer of 2020. There was a lot of discussion around police brutality during that time. And I think an article I read, invoked the Stanford Prison Experiment at some point. But really, what caught my interest, was, I mean, I started looking into it a little bit more because I was just curious, and I wasn't a
Yeah.
psychologist. Or I hadn't studied it in college or in high school. But just doing some quick Google and reading, I realized that very few of the participants had ever really spoken out in detail about their experience.
Hmm.
always just Dr. Zimbardo who had kind of center stage. And I thought that was curious. I immediately was like, well, what do they have to say? What do they think about all of this? They were the ones who lived it. And so I decided I would try to find them. And
Yeah.
that took some time. They were not particularly easy to find. Many of them were still only known by alias or by prisoner number, but I spent a good deal of time searching the Stanford archives and trying to track down names, and then eventually did find their names and started calling them. And pretty much every single one, when they picked up the phone, was like, this story is a lot more complicated than you think it is, or this story
Mm.
is a lie. And that's what kind of hooked me. And I was like,
Yeah.
immediately needed to kind of investigate and learn more.
And how, you sit there and you start to like get angry about what happened when you're watching it, but then there's that side even towards the end, and I don't want to be a spoiler, so everyone, you have to watch this, and you're not going to stop talking about it. And it's because when it does go into why do we do what we do? How do good people sometimes snap? How does that really gets to it? How do good people go bad, right? That's like the whole premise of his experiment, but it's like you never know what goes behind on behind closed doors, right? And that's one of those stories. And so you kind of, even if it's traumatic, there were lessons learned from the trauma, you
Oh,
know?
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, as the viewers will see in episode 3, we none of the participants had ever seen each other or, talked to each other since this thing happened. And we brought them all back together, and there was a lot of interesting conversations that came up from doing so. And we did it in a very special way on a replica set of the actual Stanford Prison Experiment.
That's wild that you did that. That talk about getting them to really go into their life, that
Yeah, it
trauma
was
side of it. Ooh.
jogged their memory, and they were able to revisit these moments that had just really lived on in their minds, and get to talk about it with the people who they lived it through with. And so, yeah, that was a really important and special experience for really all of us, and for the show, I think too, to watch them grapple with what they did, to watch them find closure, and to talk
Mm,
about these bigger picture ideas.
mm. And the gentleman from France who got into the archives. Oh my gosh, like that's crazy. I'd be tripping out if I was him. Like I think he did. Find all these real records that hadn't been surfaced, yet.
Oh, Thibault Letexier is just a genius, brilliant historian, researcher, and without him, I think, a lot of this would still we wouldn't know a lot of the things that we know now. So he's such a great character. Never set out to quote unquote debunk the Stanford Prison Experiment, but once you start digging, you start to really he started to unearth a lot of interesting materials.
Wow, wow. So did it freak you out putting it together and meeting him and, like whenever we interview a psychologist, I go, "Oh God, they're going to look at my brain." So was there any freaky moments for you like as it freaked us out as a viewer? And freaked out in that it makes you think and it's kind of like, "Wow, someone could pull this off."
I mean, I think there are always nerves going into an interview, especially with somebody as iconic as Dr. Zimbardo. But I have to say, he was really welcoming. He was really charming. Even in his late 80s, he was eloquent and could explain himself. And he was open to having a conversation. And I think he very much defends his study and does not agree with any of the criticisms whatsoever. But he still wanted to have the conversation, and I really respect that. And I'm so
Yeah.
glad that he would play ball, essentially.
Oh, that is amazing. I mean, because it was like when he was showing you, you know, images and things like that on his computer, he was like, you could see he was an elder now and just trying to like make peace with it in a way. I kind of felt like he was trying to make peace with it
Yeah,
all.
yeah, and I think he has tried to make peace with it. Something that we don't really get into in the series is that Dr. Zimbardo's kind of last big project was a project called the Heroic Imagination Project, which was entirely about how everyday people can be heroes if you,
Mm,
if you if you want to be. And so it's kind of the inverse of, I would say, the Stanford Prison Experiment, but that's what he was devoting his time to, teaching people how to kind of tap into their heroic instincts. And you do have to wonder if part of that was, a response to these years of talking about evil. He wanted to change the narrative,
go to the light,
be more positive. But yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for making this and doing it. And congratulations on a very well done series. Really, when I say riveting, I mean it. It's like, you're like, well, no, don't stop. I don't want to even go to the bathroom. This is like crazy. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, and best wishes. Win all the awards.
Thank you, Lisa. So fun to talk to you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You bet. Thank you for listening to Big Blend Radio. Keep up with our shows at bigblendradio.com.